So, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much for coming. On behalf of European Internet Forum, let me welcome you. My name is Ivan Stefanec. I'm a member of European Parliament, and today we will talk about child safety online, particularly about fighting child sexual abuse. We have privilege to welcome our great speakers today. First of all, Caterina Molinari, who is Policy Officer, Fights Against Cybercrime and Child Sexual Abuse, DG Home, European Commission. Welcome. We've got here with us Jean-Cristophe Toquin, the Coordinator of Encryption Europe. And we've got Tomas Krissak, who is really expert in information security. So those are distinguished speakers. And let me highlight at the beginning, dear friends, that this topic is really very timely because, as we learned during pandemic, each of us spent more time on internet, but we learned not only about benefits, but also about the threats. And particularly, we realized a lot of threats for our children. Let me give you just three most important figures, which are quite frightening. First of all, over 1/3 of children have been asked to do something sexually explicit online they were uncomfortable with or didn't want to do. Second frightening figure is that National Center for Missing and Exploited Children captures more than 25 million images of child pornography annually, producing more than 480,000 images per week, and this is not a definitive number. And the third figures concerning reporting, we know that up to 83% of children do not respond or tell anyone about sexual abuse or grooming happening to them. So this is something what we recognize as very, very important, and I'm happy that the European Internet Forum helps to organize this important event because this topic is really, really crucial one, and it will be still more important. I think the result and the solution is in education, in harmonized regulatory framework, and also in speed how to detect and remove this contact, which is very, very harmful. Good news is that European legislation is developing. The European Commission proposed the proposal, which is now in the European Parliament and is just discussed and amended in the European Parliament. It is also connected with very good proposals. For example, establishment of EU Centre on Child Sexual Abuse as a decentralized agency to enable the implementation of the new regulation. I think this is quite a new step ahead. Also, it is related to mandatory risk assessment and risk mitigation measures. So it means that providers of hosting or interpersonal communication services will have to assess the risk that their services are misused to disseminate child sexual abuse material or for the solicitation of children known as grooming. Also, in terms of clear reporting obligation, this proposal obliges providers that have detected online child sexual abuse to report it to the EU Centre, which is proposed. I think official removal is very important, and very important is also coordination with national authorities. National authorities can issue removal orders if the child sexual abuse material is not swiftly taken down. So those are quite important points we are going also to discuss, but once again, I'm very happy to host this event and to welcome distinguished speaker. First one, Caterina, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, and thanks for the invitation, for having me here. As you can imagine, as a representative of the Commission team working on the proposal, I will briefly speak about the proposal. I will be short because I'm sure there will be a lot of specific questions, and I prefer to leave space for those. But so the Commission proposed this child sexual abuse regulation in May 2022 as a follow-up to the 2020 strategy for a more effective fight against child sexual abuse. And of course, and as already has been mentioned, the proposal intends to respond to a need to fight against what is unfortunately a growing phenomenon. This is the phenomenon of online child sexual abuse. Just a few figures that you're all aware of, I think. In 10 years, from 2010 to 2020, reports to NCMEC in the United States have increased in a staggering manner from 1 to 21 million. Grooming has increased enormously, especially during pandemic times, and also the recent 2021 annual report from the IWF has shown that self-generated, so-called self-generated material is also increasingly common online, and this is often the result of sextortion, of sort of blackmailing. And we also know that what we see is only the tip of the iceberg, because only very few companies currently report child sexual abuse online, to NCMEC most notably. And we know that in 2020, one company, Facebook, reported 95% of the content that was reported to NCMEC. So this tells us a lot about how many companies do not report, do not undertake voluntary detection. So against this background, the proposal attempts to find a solution to fight against this phenomenon, and it does so. And the solution that revolves around two components. The first one is the imposition of obligations for online providers, and the second one is the establishment of the EU Center as a decentralized agency. Now, in terms of the obligations for providers, and I think this is something that has gone missing a bit in the narrative around the regulation, those are centered mostly around prevention. The blanket obligations that are imposed on all providers in scope are those to assess the risk of online child sexual abuse on one service and to mitigate this risk in coordination with national authorities, so the coordinating authorities. And so what we wanted to achieve as Commission was to make sure that providers in the digital single market, they first of all acknowledge this problem and take responsibility to assess it on their service and to adopt safety by design measures. Of course, there are also obligations to remove content, to block access to content when removal is not possible, and to report content. Now, the obligation that has, of course, received the most attention, for obvious reason, is the obligation of detection. And in this, it's important to note that detection in the proposal is framed already as a last resort measure, in that it is only imposed by a judge or independent administrative authorities when mitigation is considered insufficient to significantly reduce the risk of online child sexual abuse. Also, the process leading up to the issuance of detection orders under the proposal is quite a complex one, involving different actors. So there is the need to consult the EU Center, especially on the technical aspects. There is an obligation for providers to provide a draft implementation plan that will then be subject to the consultation with the national data protection authorities. And the result of these consultations will feed into the final assessment, which is left, as I said already, to a judge or independent administrative authority, so a body that is in charge of balancing all fundamental rights in the European Union, so it doesn't come only from a child protection perspective. Another point of note, I think, is that the proposal explicitly says that one of the things to consider before issuing a detection order is whether there are available effective and privacy protective technologies that can be deployed on the specific type of service that is concerned. So if there is no technology, in principle, there is no detection order under the proposal. So in conclusion on this part, detection is by no means presented as the rule under the proposal. It's not automatic. It comes after a long process and as a last resort. Now, the second building block of the proposal, as I mentioned, is the EU Center. And I will be quite brief on this, but it's important to note that now we rely almost entirely for the reception of reports on online child sexual abuse on NCMEC, so a US body. And which has been extremely precious, of course, in our efforts against this phenomenon. But we think that we need to set up an EU body that responds entirely to union rule, and also to stop being dependent entirely for our visibility on such a heinous crime on a body that is set up according to a third country legislation on which we have no control whatsoever. So, I mean, it could change. We could have difficulties in the data flow in the future, depending on the change in data protection regulations. So it's important that there is a dedicated EU body that receives this information. And the EU Center would also perform functions that currently are not performed by NCMEC. for example, giving feedback to providers on the accuracy of their detection and facilitating their work under the proposed regulation. Of course, the center would also be there to facilitate and support the work of law enforcement and also to support victims. The center will be able to help victims obtain information on material circulating that concerns them and help them obtain their removal. So in conclusion, when we put forward the proposal, the idea was not to put forward a proposal that would set child protection against privacy or data protection. The idea is that children need to be protected online, and this, of course, needs to be done in full respect of rights of all users. And then how this can be done is a question of technical means, but the political objectives is, of course, this. So I thank you for your attention, and I'm open to all the questions you might have later.
Today, there are two main ways for service providers to get knowledge of child abuse content. First, there's third-party reporting by hotlines, law enforcement, national authorities, and users. Third-party reporting is relevant for all kinds of service providers, from small and middle-sized enterprises up to very large online platforms, but also ICS service providers. All forms of third-party reporting usually have in common that there is no official removal order. Nonetheless, they are a very effective approach. The reported content is taken down swiftly, or other appropriate measures are taken into account following a self-regulatory approach. To give you an example, in 2022, the ECHO hotline had a success rate of more than 98% internationally. Please allow me to stress the importance of hotline reporting because they are the point of contact when it comes to anonymous user reporting of websites and specific URLs. They play a key role. Hotlines assess the reported content independently, and in case of actionable reports, they inform the relevant law enforcement agency and service providers. Additionally, they collaborate within the network of hotlines in hope for reporting content that is hosted abroad. On the other hand, there are voluntary detection measures usually relevant for larger companies, platforms, and ICS providers because they have the capability, viability, and feasibility. However, these measures depend on the offered service. Content must be accessible for the provider, which is, for instance, not the case when it comes to root server hosting, B2B cloud services, and if the service is encrypted. And you have to bear in mind, there is no one-size-fits-all solution. One has to differentiate between known material, unknown CSAM, and grooming activities. Unfortunately, in our point of view, the mentioned approaches are currently not adequately taken into account in the proposed regulation. Please let me give you some arguments why this is an issue. Hotline reporting, for instance, is an effective, experienced, trustworthy, and reliable approach in the fight against CSAM. Hotlines are important partners and stakeholders for users, law enforcement, and service providers. They are aiming for swift removal at source, they are supporting law enforcement in terms of victim identification, and they are initiating prosecution. They are experienced in assessing the material, and they have the knowledge of national legal frameworks and other national specifics. Additionally, they have a close collaboration with law enforcement and ISPs, including fast lanes for reporting or trusted reporting features. And they are only reporting pre-assessed and validated cases, so there is a relief for law enforcement and service providers. In terms of voluntary detection measures, particularly by ICS providers, from a practical point of view, an effective measure would get lost because voluntary measures give the necessary flexibility, taking specifics of the service, the type of material, and the used technologies into account. And a long process of getting a detection order could lead to a gap in detecting material. From a legal perspective, ICS will have to stop using voluntary detection measures when the interim derogation expires in August 2024, and in case the voluntary detection measures are not foreseen in the CSAM regulation. The current proposal allows detection measures only on the basis of detection orders, which can have potential negative consequences in a broader sense. In order to allow the continued detection measures by service providers, there's a risk of low thresholds in regard to detection orders conditions for all service providers. Having low thresholds for detection order conditions, in practice, this could lead to a general monitoring obligation. Consequently, the proportionality of the measure is questionable. With a voluntary approach, the negative consequences will be avoided or at least reduced. So we are calling for implementing the already existing and mentioned measures in the regulation. For third-party reporting through or by hotlines, for instance, you could mention the important role of hotlines more prominently, or hotlines could be mentioned as partners when it comes to the reporting obligations. To give you some examples, one could link to hotlines in order to comply with the obligation to have a reporting mechanism, or hotlines could be mentioned as entity for reporting by service providers. And of course, the EU Center should be obliged to collaborate with law enforcement. For voluntary measures, we suggest to add this in the regulation as well, covering all forms of child abuse to secure the status quo. And the providers should be allowed to use metadata because this is an important additional or complementary indicator for some services. On the other hand, we suggest to strengthen the conditions for the detection order at the same time, to have the detection order as a measure of last resort, covering known CSAM only. This would make it more proportional and would have more legal certainty from our point of view. And in order to avoid reporting of sexting and contacts of, for instance, 18-year-olds to 17-year-old users, which is allowed in several national legal frameworks, we suggest to exclude the grooming activities from the detection orders.
Thank you, Mr. Stefanec. So, welcome. Good afternoon, everybody. So, I'm Jean-Cristophe Toquin, from coordinator of Encryption Europe, which is an alliance of SMEs focusing on encryption and promoting, strong encryption, easy and accessible to everyone. Actually, I have different roles. Encryption Europe is one of my roles, and actually, most of my career has been on fighting cybercrime, so on allegedly the other side. And given that this is about child safety, and today on this panel we don't have child safety NGOs, or I will also speak a little bit about the other side, as I know, given I know both things, both sides. So this panel is about how do we protect children from sexual crimes online. I would not describe myself again as a child safety expert, but I spent, as I said, all my career on improving the fight against cybercrime and CSAM, child sexual abuse material in particular. And actually, most of my time I've been working for tech companies, a lot of SMEs actually, who develop and deploy technologies such as hashing technologies to detect images and videos, AI, threat intelligence, age assurance, it's technology to assess the age of users, anti-grooming technologies, so a lot of different technologies who can be applied today, deployed today in public spaces where there is no privacy issue, and I can tell you it's quite a struggle for these companies to get heard, that to have their technology tested and trusted, and so there is a wealth of opportunities if you want to protect children from crime online. Without even talking about privacy. So the topic for today, or the main issue on where indeed there is this difficulty on obligation of detection, is I think important to de-zoom or defocus from the hardest question. The hardest question is, is it okay to encrypt private communications? So with the consequence, if you do this, if you do encrypt, the consequence is that you are going to lose, law enforcement and platform will lose access to a lot of information, the 25 million reports that were mentioned by Mr. Stefanec. So is it okay to encrypt and lose this information? If you ask this question, of course, the answer is no. How can you voluntarily lose 25 million reports about people exchanging known images of abuse of children? So as a human being, you cannot answer this question. So I think what's important before you finally say, yes, let's do it, the point is rather like step back, defocus, and ask the question, which is probably the more important question: how do we develop a mindset, a change of mindset in the way we protect children. I mean, what we have to understand is that our society, I mean, I'm coming from France, in Europe, all over the world, I mean, there is a lack of support to children victims of sexual abuse. I mean, the known figures, I mean, what is publicly available is that 1 every 10 child is victim of sexual abuse from family, from relatives. So that's basically 2 to 3 kids in every classroom. So, I mean, this is a reality. So before we go to the numbers, I mean, that's what we have to keep in mind. So, and societies does not really pay attention. I mean, do we really pay attention? I mean, not really. So, question is, how do we need to develop or to change the mindset of our society so we pay more attention? Absolutely, yes. And this is where this proposal is so important. So whether you are, I mean, for privacy, for encryption, or for cybercrime, I mean, we all need to be part of this change of mindset. Now, the question is, okay, how do we develop this change of mindset? And do we want to equip law enforcement and civil society with more technologies, with more tools, with more education, so that we take action? And whether you are in encryption or privacy or cybercrime, you all want, yes, that's, I mean, more capacities given to law enforcement and to civil society. So, but now is how do we do this? And in order to do this, to increase this capacity, do we need to, I mean, have access to private communications? Do we really need to do what is actually currently done by very few companies, but with very big numbers, which is to scan communications on private communication to detect known images of videos and images? And so in the past, I have to admit, I was very much in favor of this. I was even part of Microsoft 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And I was the first one to promote the deployment of photo DNA in email and in messaging. That was 2008. And at the time, it was really necessary because there was so little technology available. Today, the technology has become really super efficient. If you combine the state-of-the-art hashing technologies, the AI, and you combine them and you run them on any type of communication, you can really detect criminal activities. But now, do we want to do it in private communication? That's a big question. So my conclusion, which I've written it because carefully every word counts. So my conclusion for this, taking into account my 2 roles, I mean, fighting cybercrime and defending privacy and encryption, my conclusion is, yes, we need a change of mindset in favor of children victims of sexual abuse. And so this proposal should be absolutely supported. This should be our focus. I mean, this change of mindset should be our focus. And there is a wealth of opportunities to deploy technologies and initiatives to detect online crimes against children. I mean, that's the fact, and the EU Center should be a great way to advance this. This said, the end-to-end encryption of private communications is fully compatible with this cultural shift. I mean, the fact we promote privacy of communication does not mean that we are against a cultural shift. And I think this is really important. And then once we have all agreed that we can move towards this change of mindset, then that's the big picture. Well, then the smaller issue, I mean, it's a big issue, but smaller issue of what do we do with the private communications we'll get a different answer. And I think we can postpone this to a later time and start with what is actually possible today, which is to use these technologies in public spaces. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stefanec, and thank you for having the opportunity to be here. I'm Tomas Krissak from Slovakia. I work in a technological company, Gerolata Technologies. And our focus, not only on this topic, but in information security in general, is to create the means how to use technology to have situational awareness on what's going on different platforms. And this is one of the reasons why in my speech, I will be giving you, I would say, two views. The one is purely technological, and I would say it might be also one of the solutions how to create the independency for Europe to actually tackle this issue. And that is that even in last few years, there were several cases when, for instance, in Slovakia, when we had a very brutal case of assassination of LGBTI members of LGBTI communities in Bratislava, we helped, for instance, the Council of Media Platforms in Slovakia to actually tackle and close down the distribution of manifesto of a person, the terrorist, who actually committed the crimes, and he was trying to spread the word and inspire others to become such shooters as himself. So the technological means to stop toxic content from spreading are here in Europe and are available to be used to tackle various problems that we have, including the ones that we will be discussing today. The second aspect is more personal. I do not only work in a digital or technological company, but I also work as an activist who has been traveling in Slovak schools throughout few past years. And with all these issues regarding information security, like rising extremism, rising trust towards disinformation, it is also occurring in Slovakia that the children are also more and more aware and vulnerable to all kinds of sexual acts or grooming or stalking incidents that might happen to them, even not only online, but also from physical space because of their families, because of the people who are surrounding them. So one of the, I would say, ways how to tackle this issue is not only doing lectures, which in our current situation, I would say, is quite impossible because we have hundreds of thousands of students in Slovakia that actually need to know more about this issue. Yet there are only few experts who are having limited time to go and see the schools. So what we have an offer for teachers and students in schools is actually that we are creating technology gamification programs where they, for instance, can play a game where they are defending themselves against the stalker. So that is a safe way how to train a person to be actually more resilient towards all these negative aspects that can happen in real online space where a mistake might create a harm. So there's a way how to train the new generation to be in a safer environment. And I would say that this is also a part of, as you said, creating the mindset. The once you provide people with the experience when they are really facing the issue, it doesn't have to be toxic or harmful, it just has to be a play. You can provide them with the necessary means how to defend themselves and also how to understand why it is right to speak up and not to be silent about these issues. So creating the mindset is also about reliving the experience in a as non-toxic way as possible. I would give you a very short close remarks. I didn't want to speak much and I want to give more space to your questions. I think that the current generation of children that are growing with all these new platforms like TikTok and many others that are just producing a lot more video content than all the previous generations of the platforms are in a very, I would say, tough spot and a different situation than their predecessors. But I also think that we are the first generation that is really doing a lot more to tackle these issues. So all of this gives me a lot of optimism that this issue can be eventually solved without creating more and more space for these crimes to happen again. And I do really am thankful that we can work on this not only on a small regional level, but what is going on in Europe is that there is this trans-regional collaboration that really opens up the space for both the technological and the human-centric aspects to actually make the change that we all need. Thank you.